Part 1. The Weary Watch. Ragnar Ironside was a man built of the northern winds and stubborn earth. His beard, the color of a winter sunset, bristled with a weariness that went deeper than any long voyage. Tonight, he stood as the sole sentinel for their small encampment nestled in the unfamiliar, soft hills of this southern land. The air was thick and still, a stark contrast to the biting sea breezes he knew so well. His gaze swept over the sleeping forms huddled around the dwindling firelight. On his broad shoulders rested the weight of two slumbering souls. Elara, with her hair like spun moonlight, leaned heavily against his left, her soft breaths ghosting against his neck. To his right, Astrid, her fiery red braid tangled with his fur-lined cloak, was equally lost in the realm of dreams. Both were shield maidens, fierce in battle, yet now as vulnerable as fledglings. Ragnar himself felt the pull of slumber, a siren song after days of raiding and weary travel. The very air seemed to hum with a dulling rhythm, a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos he usually thrived in. Boring history for sleep, he thought grimly, recalling the dry tales some skald had droned on about during their last longship journey. Ironically, it was the present, the potential dangers lurking in the shadows beyond the firelight, that threatened his vigilance. Around them lay remnants of their Viking heritage, a finely crafted Mjolnir pendant discarded near a sleeping warrior, round shields bearing their clan markings resting against saddlebags, and various intricately carved brooches glinting in the fire's embrace. These were more than just objects. They were threads connecting them to their homeland, to their gods, to their very identities in this strange new world. A twig snapped in the distance. Ragnar's hand instinctively tightened on the grip of his axe. Elara stirred slightly against his shoulder, a soft murmur escaping her lips. He remained still, his senses on high alert. The boring history of survival was being written in the silence of this night, and Ragnar knew that his wakefulness was the only shield between his sleeping companions and whatever dangers the dawn might bring. Part 2. Shadowed Whispers. The snapped twig sliced through the stillness like a shard of ice. Ragnar's muscles coiled, his blue eyes scanning the tree-line, sharp and unwavering despite his weariness. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on his vision. For a long moment, there was only the rustle of leaves and the gentle breathing of the women on his shoulders. Then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the night air. It wasn't the sound of the wind. It was lower, guttural, like voices murmuring in a tongue he didn't recognize, yet instinctively felt was hostile. His grip on his axe tightened further. He dared not move suddenly, lest he wake Elara and Astrid. Their safety was paramount. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his weight, trying to get a better view without disturbing his sleeping burdens. The foreign whispers seemed to be growing closer, weaving through the darkness like unseen threads. He could almost feel eyes on them, watching from the periphery. Ragnar thought of their journey. They had sailed far from their fjords, seeking new lands and riches. This particular foray inland had been less fruitful than hoped, yielding little more than a few trinkets and the weary bones of his warriors. Now, it seemed they had stumbled into someone else's territory, and these unseen watchers were likely not welcoming. He could feel the weight of Elara's head pressing into his neck, the steady rhythm of Astrid's breathing against his cloak. They trusted him to keep them safe. He would not fail them. With painstaking care, Ragnar began to shift again, his every movement measured and silent. He needed to wake them, but subtly, without causing panic. The whispers were closer now, laced with a sibilant quality that sent a prickle of unease down his spine. Whatever lurked in the darkness was drawing nearer. The boring history of past battles offered little comfort now. This night demanded present vigilance and a warrior's instinct for survival. Part 3. Eyes open in the night. Ragnar subtly tensed the muscles in his shoulders. Elara stirred first, her brow furrowing slightly. He gave a near imperceptible shake of his head. Her eyes fluttered open, and she focused on his face, her gaze instantly becoming sharp and alert, the sleepiness banished. He pressed a finger to his lips, then gestured silently towards the darkness beyond the firelight. Alera's hand instinctively went to the hilt of the short sword at her hip. Astrid, sensing the shift in Ragnar's posture, also began to awaken. Her fiery eyes, even in the dim light, held a warrior's intensity. Ragnar repeated his silent warning. Astrid nodded curtly, her hand reaching for the spear that lay beside her. No words were exchanged. Years of fighting alongside each other had forged a silent understanding between them. They were a shield wall in human form, and even half asleep, their instincts were honed for survival. Ragnar slowly eased Alera off his shoulder, his movements as fluid and quiet as a hunting wolf. She crouched low to the ground, her eyes scanning the shadows, her senses reaching out for any sign of movement. Astrid did the same on his other side. Now that he was free of their weight, Ragnar stood fully, his axe held loosely but ready in his hands. The whispering seemed closer still, circling them like unseen predators. He could now distinguish individual voices, though the language remained foreign and menacing. "They are close," Astrid mouthed silently, her gaze fixed on a particularly dense patch of trees. Alera nodded, her hand now gripping her drawn sword. The fire crackled, a small beacon in the encroaching darkness, but also a potential marker for their enemies. Ragnar knew they couldn't stay here. They needed to move, to find a defensible position before the unseen threat revealed itself fully. The boring tales of history offered no strategies for this specific predicament, this silent dance with unseen foes in an unfamiliar land. Their survival depended on their wits, their training, and the fierce bond they shared. I will generate the next part of the story. Part 4 prompt. Describe the encounter with the unseen threat. Detail the initial moments of the confrontation, the type of adversaries they face, and the beginning of the ensuing conflict. Part 4. The rustle and the snarl. The first sign was a rustle in the undergrowth, closer this time, followed by the snap of another twig, less accidental, more deliberate. Then, glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, low to the ground and moving swiftly. They weren't the eyes of wolves. There was an intelligence there, a cunning that sent a fresh wave of unease through Ragnar. Before he could fully react, a low snarl ripped through the night air, followed by a guttural yelp. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, hunched and wiry, their forms indistinct in the dim light, but their numbers seemingly significant. They moved with an unnatural swiftness, their limbs long and their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. These are no ordinary warriors. Their movements were too fluid, too bestial. Their weapons appear to be crude, but wickedly sharp, sharpened bones and jagged stones lashed to wooden handles. They were unlike any foe Ragnar had faced before. The first of the creatures lunged at Alera, its snarl echoing in the confined space. She reacted instantly, her short sword flashing in a swift arc. The creature shrieked as the blade found its mark, a dark, viscous fluid oozing from the wound. Simultaneously, another two of the beings attacked Astrid, their movements surprisingly coordinated. She parried their crude weapons with her spear, keeping them at bay with practiced ease, but their sheer numbers were a concern. Ragnar roared, a primal sound of defiance and fury. He hefted his axe and charged into the fray, the weight of the sleeping women on his conscience now fueling his rage. His axe swung in a deadly arc, cleaving through the air and connecting with a sickening thud against one of the creatures. It crumpled to the ground, its glowing eyes dimming. The encampment was no longer a place of rest, but a battleground. The boring history of Viking raids suddenly felt tame compared to the savage reality of this encounter. Ragnar, Alera, and Astrid stood back to back, a small island of defiance against a tide of unknown horrors. The fight for their survival had begun. I will generate the next part of the story. Part 5 prompt. Describe the ongoing battle in more detail. Focus on the fighting styles of Ragnar, Alera, and Astrid, the characteristics of their adversaries, and the challenges they face. Part 5. Steel and Savage Fury. The battle devolved into a chaotic dance of steel and savage fury. Ragnar was a whirlwind of brutal efficiency, his heavy axe a deadly extension of his will. Each swing was aimed with lethal precision, cleaving through the thin limbs and fragile bodies of the creatures that swarmed them. His years of warfare were evident in every parry, every strike, his movements economical yet devastating. Alara was a whirlwind of swift strikes and agile footwork. Her shorter sword allowed for quicker movements, and she darted around the larger forms of Ragnar and Astrid, finding openings to thrust her blade into the flanks and throats of their attackers. Her face was set with grim determination, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Astrid, with her longer spear, maintained a more defensive posture, using the reach of her weapon to keep the creatures at bay. Her movements were steady and precise. Each thrust aimed to create distance and exploit any openings. She fought with a cool-headed efficiency, her fiery spirit tempered by years of disciplined training. Their adversaries were relentless, driven by a primal ferocity. They attacked with a reckless abandon, their sharp claws and crude weapons posing a constant threat. They moved with an unsettling speed and agility, their guttural snarls and hisses filling the night air. Their tough, leathery hides offered some protection against their blades, requiring precise and forceful strikes to bring them down. The sheer number of the creatures was their biggest advantage. For every one they felled, two more seemed to emerge from the darkness. Ragnar felt a growing weariness in his limbs, but he dared not falter. He knew that if one of them fell, the others would be quickly overwhelmed. The fire began to die down, casting long, distorted shadows that further obscured their attackers. The air was thick with the stench of the creature's foul breath and the metallic tang of blood. Despite the ferocity of their defense, Ragnar knew they couldn't sustain this indefinitely. They were outnumbered and in unfamiliar territory. The boring history lessons had never prepared him for a fight against such bizarre and relentless foes. Survival depended on finding an advantage, a way to break the relentless onslaught. I will generate the next part of the story. Part 6, The Howl and the Echo. Just as Ragnar's axe became slick with the creature's ichor and Alara staggered slightly, a new sound ripped through the chaotic din of snarls and clashing steel. It was a howl, deep and resonant, unlike anything they had heard before. It echoed through the hills, and for a brief moment, the smaller creatures surrounding them seemed to falter, their glowing eyes flicking nervously towards the source of the sound. Then, the howling came again, closer this time, and it was answered by other howls in the distance, creating a chilling chorus that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. The creatures around Ragnar, Alara, and Astrid became agitated, their snarls turning into whimpers. Some of them began to back away, their predatory hunger momentarily overshadowed by a primal fear. From the darkness beyond the firelight, larger shapes began to emerge. These are similar to the creatures they had been fighting, but bigger and more powerfully built. Their eyes glowed with an even fiercer intensity, and their howls resonated with a chilling authority. Ragnar realized with a grim certainty that they had stumbled upon something more than just isolated predators. They had likely disturbed a nest or hunting pack, and these larger beasts were the dominant members. The smaller creatures were now scattering, making way for their larger kin. The turning point had come, but not in their favor. The initial wave of attackers had been a mere scouting party. Now, they faced the true strength of whatever lurked in these shadowed hills. The weariness in Ragnar's limbs intensified, but a new resolve hardened his gaze. They had survived the first onslaught. They would face this new threat with the same Viking spirit that had carried their ancestors across vast oceans. The boring history of their people was filled with tales of overcoming impossible odds, and they would add their own saga to that legacy. I will generate the concluding part of the story. Part 7 prompt. Describe the final confrontation and the resolution of the story. Detail the outcome of the battle and the immediate aftermath for Ragnar, Alara, and Astrid. Part 7. dawn, and departure. The larger creatures were formidable foes, their claws longer, their teeth sharper, and their hides thicker. Ragnar, Alara, and Astrid fought with a desperate ferocity, their movements honed by exhaustion and the primal instinct to survive. Ragnar's axe found purchase against tougher hides, but each swing cost him more strength. Alara's speed was now hampered by fatigue, yet her strikes remained precise. Astrid's spear kept the beasts at bay, but the force of their lunges threatened to overwhelm her. The battle raged until the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky. As the pale light began to creep over the hills, the howls of the creatures diminished, replaced by guttural snarls of frustration. One by one, the larger beasts, followed by their smaller kin, began to retreat back into the shadows, their glowing eyes fading into the growing light. Finally, the last of them disappeared into the tree-line, leaving behind a scene of carnage. The ground around the dying fire was littered with the still forms of the creatures, their dark ichor staining the earth. Ragnar leaned heavily on his axe, his chest heaving, his body aching in every muscle. Alara stood beside him, her sword dripping, her face streaked with dirt and blood. Astrid, though pale, held her spear steady, her gaze still scanning the surrounding woods. They had survived. The rising sun revealed the extent of their injuries, cuts, bruises, and exhaustion etched on their faces and bodies. Their small encampment was destroyed, their meager supplies scattered. Yet they stood. Ragnar looked at Alara and Astrid, a flicker of grim pride in his weary eyes. They had faced an unknown terror and emerged victorious. This night, devoid of boring history, had forged a new tale of courage and resilience. Without a word, they began to gather what remained of their belongings. The joy of survival was tempered by the knowledge of their losses and the long journey ahead. But as they started to move, leaving behind the blood-soaked ground, they carried with them not just their wounds, but also the quiet understanding that they had faced the darkness together and lived to see the dawn. The memory of the chilling howls and the glowing eyes would forever be etched in their minds, a stark reminder of the night the boring history lessons had fallen silent, and the true, brutal reality of survival had spoken.